collection of images that I received when my grandparents passed away. As the photographer in my family, or one of the few grandkids who actually cared, they just sort of dumped it on me, right? A cigar box full of images, and most of them unmarked, oftentimes full of objects with something like a name or an address. Family pictures, maybe a family business, more family pictures, photographs printed on postcards, photographs made with cameras from the earliest sort of consumer available cameras, professional portraits made in studios, and images made casually by maybe somebody in the family who had a camera. Why is it important to look through things like this? Well, I think it's important for a couple of reasons. First of all, my relationship to photography is very strange, in that the majority of the images I make these days are made with a digital camera or made on a smartphone, and it's important that I reconnect with the history of photography in order to understand sort of the role and place of that digital camera in my life. It's also really important for me to connect with these people and the images of this family and the stories we tell ourselves about our family. Photography has sort of a complicated relationship with the truth, the same way that most family stories do. And what I enjoy about family photographs is maybe sometimes the truths they tell, truths that may have been obscured, or maybe misunderstood as a child, or maybe truths that are deeper than the truths that we tell ourselves in our family gatherings. It's really important for me just to connect to these people too, because of the way that I typically make photographs on a day-to-day basis. They tend to be just deeply selfish objects. They're solely for the purpose of my own, maybe my own short or bad memory. They're merely kind of expressions of my own vanity. It's helpful for me to go back through these images and remember what photography can be used for and what it has been used for, and the role in history that photography can play and maybe even should play. Old images, especially old family archives, have the ability to sort of put me back into that headspace, that sort of place of research and consideration, and a space of wondering what photography can be, and maybe what sort of images I need to be putting into the world. Now, a couple of different types of images, right, oftentimes show up in family archives. I mean, the idea that we point cameras at ourselves is nothing particularly new. Since the beginning of photography, the idea of working with the portrait medium is very common. The Smithsonian is only one museum, right, that houses huge inventories of portraits, right, the Portrait Gallery. As soon as I think about portraits, Frederick Douglass comes to mind as an early sort of advocate for photography and sort of obsessive portrait, an individual who's obsessive about having his portrait made. He is an example of somebody who really understood the power and longevity of a portrait and was photographed hundreds of times, maybe even thousands of times. And to this day, right, all of these images survive. Multiple different mediums. He was very interested in the photograph as a modern medium for pushing a public image and having a very sticky image, sticky sort of socially. Now, photographers, since photography came around, right, were oftentimes setting up photo studios, right, pictures, every style. and they would, for a small fee, produce headshots, family portraits, stories, things like that. They'd take it on the road, and these things would live in wagons. And so oftentimes a lot of the photographs that I find in my family photo archives were likely made by a photographer in a studio, not even necessarily somebody who was holding the camera in their hand. And just like a member of the family. Cameras may not have been that readily available, and the skill needed to, the skill and chemistry needed to produce images was not necessarily a skill that everybody had. And so the idea of going to a portrait studio, right, was not a totally uncommon idea. It was a bit of a novelty, and Americans in particular loved the idea and took it up to sort of have family portraits produced as often as they could afford them. But also other kinds of photographs are being produced. I mean, it's obviously sort of seen as an invaluable tool by historians. Cameras pointing at moments that felt heavy historically, and the camera and photographers and historians relied on photographers' ability to sort of tell long-standing truths about those things. This is particularly important, I think, in considering the sort of mythology of the American West, and how stories are told, and we tell ourselves stories about the West, and how cameras and photographs can sort of continue to tell those stories. I find that it's really interesting to sort of use my family photo album as a way to get access to larger photo histories. And what I think I would like for you guys to do is to dig through some of your family photo histories as a way to access the sort of larger photographic world and to see what's in there. And what I want you to consider is what kind of images did my family use to photograph itself? Are these casual images? Are they formal portraits? Are they images made by an unskilled photographer? That's sort of like it was a happenstance sort of situation, a lot of technical flaws, exposure and focus and technical sort of dilemmas in the images? Or are they finely crafted images that were made by a careful practitioner? One of the things that I would like you to consider is what sort of truths are being told about your family and the sort of history of your family. What role do you have in continuing that tradition of photographing your family? You guys are going to be the family photographers in your household. It's a very good chance that you may be the only people in your home who will ever receive any formal photography training. And so this archive, which will be inherited by somebody other than you down the road, will have your images in it. And what will your images tell you, tell your future sort of descendants, your future ancestors? What sort of truths will be told to them about the life that you're living today in the early 21st century?